Hello again and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Good morning from Warsaw. Georgia has gone through several key waves of protests over the past year. The first was spring protests against the so-called foreign agents law. Then Georgians protested against irregularities in the 26th October parliamentary elections. However, the most numerous and determined protests have been those lasting since 28th of November, after Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze announced that Georgia would not start accession talks with the EU until 2028. About the current political situation in Georgia, I'm joined now by Shota Gvineria, Economic Policy Research Centre of Georgia. Good morning, sir. Good to have you.
Morning. Thanks for the invitation.
Right, so President Salome Zurabishvili's message has been clear for many months. I am ready to sit down and find a solution, peaceful solution, regarding the timing of the elections, but the decisions must be made by the 29th. Now, in contrast, the response of the current government, in the words of Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze, is threatening. Zurabishvili will have to step down. Let's see where she will continue her life, behind bars or outside them. So is the situation going to dissolve itself, or is it a tug of war that we are just experiencing?
Well, situation is not going to dissolve itself for sure. And the only possible outcome from this crisis is the new elections. And everybody now in Georgia understands it perfectly clearly. So what I wanted to emphasize is that in your initial remarks, you referred to Kobakhidze as the Prime Minister of Georgia. I would say it's very wrong, because this now the only legitimate authority in Georgia is President Zurabishvili, who has been elected by the Georgian people, and Georgian people who are protesting in the streets in hundreds of thousands actually see her as the voice of the Georgian people. And the recent final report of OSCE ODIHR's report about the October 26 elections is very clear. These elections were falsified, were rigged, and the parliament that have installed itself without the recognition of the sitting president, and then this illegitimate parliament have elected the legitimate government, actually is the violation of the Georgian constitution. So by Georgian laws and constitution, and because the elections now have been confirmedly rigged on October 26, this is not a legitimate government. They lack internal legitimacy from the people. They lack external legitimacy. They have been congratulated by the Russian government and Russia's proxies, such as, Maduro and Lukashenko and others. So I wouldn't refer to them as the government, and I wouldn't refer to Kobakhidze as the prime minister. And that's the assurance for me for saying that basically this situation is not going away until this illegitimate government steps down and announces the new day for the rerun of the elections.
Thank you, sir, for having corrected me. However, the situation is really complex, and please understand the complexity of it, and also the difficulty with naming the officials in Georgia right now. We understand and we hear you, and we understand the determination of the opposition, but given the scale of the protests which have been going on intermittently and continuously for now more than 20 days, we wonder what's going to happen on 29th of December with Salome Zurabishvili constantly repeating that she's not going to step down.
Well, that's a good question. I seriously doubt that anybody has a good answer to this question right now, because what we see is that the illegitimate authorities in Georgia have now fully borrowed this playbook from Russia, and they act based on Russia's action plan in this kind of crisis situation, which means that basically they deny the facts, they claim that white is black and black is white. That's usual Russia's disinformation and propaganda playbook. So even this report, which was so clearly, vocally, and undeniably negative and critical of the October 26 elections, was actually covered in government propaganda media and by the legitimate authorities as positive. So that they actually thanked OSCE for legitimizing the October 26 elections, when this report clearly, black on white, says that it's not OSCE's mandate and authority to legitimate or delegitimate any elections, and B, these elections were conducted in a very, very low standard. They did not meet any international democratic standards, and the will of the Georgian people was not reflected in these elections. And they still come out and say, okay, thank you, OSCE, for finally putting an end to the speculations about legitimacy. So this is kind of the stage in the regime's existence where they actually deny the facts, where they come up with their own propaganda narratives and lines of messaging. No matter who says what, they interpret it in the way that is suitable for their propaganda. But having said this, I say I would even not think that under these circumstances they do not recognize that it's the point of non-return for them. And the protest that we see in the streets is not going to be reversed by anything short of the new elections. Mm-hmm. And that's something that the authorities should and must understand. The sooner the better for everybody. But if that moment will come before December 29 deadline or not, that unfortunately I can't say.
I can only imagine the frustration of Georgian opposition, and the sanctions, which are presented as one of the effective forms of pressure on the current Georgian government, are expected, as we say. But I also can imagine how frustrated the opposition in Georgia must have been when those sanctions were not approved unilaterally by a European Union. But now, can we expect more severe sanctions, do you think, in this spectrum of policy within European Union right now, and the division of different voices? Do you expect the EU leaders to take stronger action?
I do, actually, and the report that I have been referring to a couple of times already today was the milestone, I guess, for that, because the sanctions, the democratic countries take sanctions very seriously, and there is a procedure. If things are as evident as they were in October 26 elections, you still need some legal proof and basis for that sanctions, and everybody was waiting for the final report. Now, having said this, there are two tracks for which the illegitimate authorities of Georgia have been considered for sanctions. One is the rigged elections, and the second is the violation of human rights during the protests and illegal detention and torture and beating of 500 people that were absolutely illegally detained, or I would even say kidnapped by the police for the weeks that we have been protesting out in the streets. So now we have a legal proof that the elections were manipulated. So I expect that the countries and the European Union member states will take this as a legal base for them to impose more severe and actually actionable and not symbolic sanctions on the illegitimate authorities. And that will, I hope, influence also the EU decisions, despite some countries that are hesitant to support the consensus. I think there is enough that EU can do on the basis of the qualified majority.
Yes, right. We are watching very violent pictures from the protests in Georgia, and we are wondering how about the increase in attempts of intimidation of the opposition. I mean, coming back to those protests themselves, we've seen really brutal actions by the police being undertaken, and the titushki also hired by the oligarchs. So what about the level of violence? Do you expect it to grow?
Well, what we have seen for the couple of few days is that the regime actually realized that more violence they inflicted on the protesters, the sooner the amount of people and the scale of protest was growing. So they were getting the counterproductive results from this violence. They were meant to scare the people and they were meant to oppress the protest, but actually the resultant outcome was completely opposite. And more people were joining the rally, and more and more people were raising their voice and vocally opposing government's oppressive reaction to the peaceful protests. So now they have changed the tactics a little bit. They have not been so violent on a mass scale. So now they started to target the leaders of the civil society, the leaders of the opposition, the people who are actually vital and relevant to this vibe that we see in the streets in Tbilisi, and they harass them in different ways by the legal tools. They inflict disproportionately high fines on these people, or they detain them with the administrative charges and lock them away from the protests for a couple of days. So now they have learned their lesson that the aggression against the people actually widens the scope of the protests, and for the couple of few days they have been changing the tactics. But yesterday, what we saw with the illegitimate prime minister threatening the president of Georgia to send her to jail, and then the president was actually speaking to the protest rally, and she, as you have accurately told the viewers of this program, have set the deadline for Bidzina Ivanishvili to come to her and negotiate the date of the new elections. Now, in parallel to this, we see that these tools of brutality from the Ministry of Interior has been also accumulating in the vicinity of the place where the protests take place. So it can actually go either way. One thing I can say for sure is that this regime actually, as I said, is acting straight from the Russian playbook. So we know how this kind of
that's what we
negotiations
see.
has been taken.
I'm afraid we have to put a full stop here. Shota Gvineria, thank you very much for this lengthy opinion and comments. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Economic policy research from Center of Georgia was our guest. And that concludes this edition of World Talk. But please stay tuned to TVP World with the news coming up next.